No mai haere mai, ki tēnei hui. Welcome to our friends from Wellington Water. So this session, we're going to have a presentation from Wellington Water, then there'll be time for questions, and then our friends will leave, and then we'll have some more opportunity to ask questions of our own team, and all of that will be live streamed. And then we have another session about the rating policy review, which will also be live streamed. So if we need to go over a little bit, the second session should be a bit shorter, so we can go over a little bit on this one. So welcome. The floor is yours.
Tēnā koutou.
Siobhan. Sorry, Siobhan.
I'll just do a very intro.
Looked at me. She gave me the look.
Welcome back to Wellington Water. They last presented their initial scenarios on the 12th of October. So since then, the team at Wellington Water have been working on developing a programme to fit the baseline budget, which you've seen in the presentation that was sent out last night. So that's based on the 2021 LTP budget lines. I did want to just say something because it's really important to understand the context and the current operating environment that we're in. So despite a change in government, we are still operating under the current water services legislation. So there is still that marching on towards reform, but there is also then the uncertainty of the incoming government who've clearly signalled that they want to repeal the water legislation. So the water legislation that was passed into law earlier this year did require us or all councils to include 2 years of planning in their long-term plans. Given the uncertain environment that we're operating in, we have asked Wellington Water to really focus on the first 3 years, so that's what they're going to be presenting you today. And what they've done is worked up the programme that can be delivered under their various scenarios that they're going to be talking to today. So that's what they've spent the last few weeks doing. So, and they've done a really good job of developing that programme. So essentially what's being presented in the baseline is a no-frills programme. It's primarily focused on looking after existing assets and making sure that they can meet the new standards, environmental standards that have been set by Te Mata ROI. We'll allow 25 minutes for the presentation, 20 minutes for questions, and then you'll get 15 minutes with council officers to ask us questions.
The clarification point, you said that, so under the existing legislation, there's what planning horizon? You said 2 years.
So we were required, yes, councils were required to include 2 years, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Yes.
Another clarification as well. Since we are doing the 10 years long-term plan, you request them to do the 3 years, how that play out in our long-term plan?
We might.
We'll
cover that at the end when we. But good question. Thanks. And my apologies. Now the floor is yours.
Thank you, councillors. It's great to be here, and thanks to your officers. We've worked really closely with them on this, which has been a really great opportunity for us both. I'll introduce the team. I think you've met most of us before, but I've got Steve Hutchison, who's our Chief Advisor, Wastewater. Tim Harty, did I say Steve? I did say Steve, didn't I? Tim Harty, who is our Head of Network Operations and Engineering, Pete Wells, who is our Head of Service Planning. In the audience, we've got Fraser Clark, who's our Head of Three Water Strategy, and Mark Ford, who is the Relationship Manager for Wellington City. Just to contextualise this, we all know that water is critical to the success of a city. Wellington City does have the oldest and the largest network that we manage on behalf of 6 councils. The 2022 valuation estimated the value of your assets at $7.5 billion. You've got 2,700 kilometres of pipe, 108 pump stations and 2 wastewater treatment plants. You do have a legacy of underinvestment. And as Siobhan has said, there is an uncertainty about the future of who is going to own the assets and the funding mechanisms around those. Today we are recommending what can be delivered. I know that's really important for the council, but I will say that the LTP baseline that you have and that we are providing options on is insufficient to meet some of the most basic needs for the city. So without further ado, I'll hand over to the team.
Good afternoon. I'm going to rattle through this pretty quickly so we can get through to the questions. As Siobhan said in the pack last night, the detailed slides we won't cover, but we do have them and we can refer to them if the question's needed. Okay. So it might be quite quick, it might be quite appear quite superficial, but we're here to talk to it at the end. Just remember where we are in this process. So this is having given you the top and the bottom of what can be delivered against the baseline funding. This is coming back and building up and giving you more detail on what's in the baseline, and then making recommendations about options for increasing that. For us, once you've made your decisions, then we need a little bit of guidance to finalise the programme so we can feed into that for you. And then we will work with you towards developing the detailed material that goes into consultations afterwards. So the figures in here are based on the Council's 2131 LTP and the baseline budget set in there. As Julie said, there are significant risks if we fund only to the baseline level in both OPEX and CAPEX. And we would be recommending higher than that in terms of a better outcome for the waters. We'll touch on, so just to make it clear, we've reduced the presentation from the detailed material you've got, but it basically follows the same format with the same information, but just for ease of talking to. So focusing on the OPEX first, there are 4 sets of information there. You've got this year's budget, which comes out at 50.5 million. We've got a budget that's been built to align to the baseline funding level, and we just need to make it clear with that one that there is no funding at all for planned maintenance in that, and by December we will have no funding to continue with reactive maintenance under that scenario. So we don't believe it's viable to support that. There's an option 2, which is basically this year's budget plus unavoidable cost increases, and most of those are related to treatment plant costs from higher input costs like energy, higher charges to Pororua for the JV element of that, and disposal costs. So most of that is unavoidable. There's an extra 2 and a bit million there just in treatment plant. So that's that bit. And then we've got a recommended budget, which is what we believe is necessary to look after the infrastructure to the correct level, an appropriate level of planned maintenance and a level of reactive maintenance that meets the incoming demand for calls. The baseline budget we talked about briefly. There's critical risks in here because there is no planned maintenance. So that means all of the infrastructure, the pump stations, etc., are run to fail. We turn up when they break down, and only until December when we run out of money to turn up at all. So it only responds to priority 1 leaks. We don't think it's sufficient to meet the city's needs. And it will come with public health and compliance risks and things like that. And it will inevitably lead to higher maintenance costs in further years. So it's not recommended by Wellington Water. Option 2 is carrying on this year's level. So there's we can't avoid some costs that come through to us, basically about consenting and compliance and treatment plant operating costs. So we've treated those as fixed costs. The management fee is in there. That's also treated as a fixed cost, but there is a reduction on this year. And then we've tried to fit in the level of investigations and planned maintenance and reactive maintenance that broadly parallels this year. We'd just like to note that although you've increased funding significantly and in support of leak repair, the network is old, and so it is failing, and we do understand that. But at the end of the year, we haven't, with the funding we've got, we haven't got enough money to respond to all of the calls we get. So there will be an increasing legacy of calls at the end of this year. And if we carry on with that funding, clearly that will increase again next year. Yes. Sorry, yeah, financial, yes. Capital expenditure. So we've got 2 scenarios here. We've got the baseline funding level from the 21-31 period, and then we've got our recommended level, which is that maximum deliverable. What could Wellington Water, if the funding was made available, how much could it deliver based on an increasing capacity year on year by growing our capacity of our contractor suppliers and our consultant suppliers. So we're talking about the baseline here. And our approach to this has been to, I'll just talk to this slide very briefly. This slide is updated from the one in your pack. There was an error in this scale, and the in that orange line was not correctly shown. So this is the correct line now in that. But again, we're talking about the gap of risk that we could fill if funding was available to do that. And we appreciate there's lots of hard decisions, but we'll give you some guidance through this as to what we could do and what we might be able, depending on what you'd like to focus on. So the baseline budget, so the approach we took was we continued with existing committed programs. We've added in compliance and consenting related activity that we consider to be unavoidable. Then there's routine money that we use for reactive and planned, can be small renewals in pump stations and et cetera, and around the network that we just use every year. So all the different teams use an amount of money to deliver that kind of activity. And there hasn't been a lot of money to support new activity. So what you see coming through here is the majority of the money is put into looking after the existing assets, so 75%, and then there's very little money left to fund things like growth, specific new growth activities that might align with your development strategies. There's no money in here, no new money in here to support resilience activities or climate change type responses. We have funded in here responses to the new global consents that are coming through for wastewater overflows and stormwater. So the program of activity needed to comply with that is funded on here based on an implementation date of 2050, which we would note is not currently what GW has just gone out to consultation on. They've gone out on an earlier date, which we would struggle, I think, to meet that earlier date in terms of the level of investment needed to achieve that. So the kind of things that are in this program, we're continuing with those. And the largest element of this is that CBD wastewater pipe renewals that you see and the increased level of service in the CBD. So that's the largest element of the program that's continued through. But you've also got some of the follow-up investments in the reservoirs, following the VHCA work. We've got continuing activity in the treatment plants, and you'll see that coming through. So we're focusing on some of those items at the treatment plants, like the inlet pump stations, the clarifiers, and the most critical thing there at the moment is the electrical and control system, which is very much out of date and a severe risk to the operation of the plant. So I think that's almost $20 million worth of funding to support that, and that's for the 3 wastewater areas there. Carey's Gully, Moa Point and Western, they all operate off the same system. And then that, we talked about there, that modelling to support the environmental water quality outcomes. And there is some pressure management activity in here which would support that water leakage. So in terms of that critical acute risk that we have to water supply, we haven't got a lot of capital investment in here that will support that. This is some of the pressure management that would reduce the pressure into the water, which should reduce the leak quantities. And there's a little bit of renewal of existing commercial water meters, but that's not the same thing as investing in water metering more generally. Some of the risks, so there is still a lot of outstanding activity that we'd recommend to fund for critical renewals that has been identified through condition assessments at Moa Point and Western. The smart metering investments, which is that key response to the water supply risk. Increasing the amount that we put into pressure control valves, which is another more immediate, as a short-term response to the water supply risk. There were a couple of outcomes from the very high criticality assessments of very large critical wastewater pipes. So there's the eastern trunk main, which comes from Miramar over the links and past the eastern side of the airport into the treatment plant. That was identified as a critical risk and at risk of collapse and failure. And similarly, the triplicate interceptor, which is the main wastewater pipe for the city, and it goes down the other side of the airport, the Moa Point side, from Kilbirnie through to Moa Point along the western side of the runway. That's also identified as a critical risk of failure. So those aren't funded in this. And then the level of renewals that are able to be funded in that is only about 37% of what we would recommend to lift to address the renewals backlog. So that's not fully funded. And the oldest reservoir that you operate is at Bell Road. It's 112 years old and has some structural issues. There's no funding to address that either within this program. Oh, sorry, no, there might be, but it's later on in the program, not as early as it should be. So just coming back to an overview, in terms of OPEX, the option 2, clearly, we would recommend option 3 because that's what we've put down, but option 2 will meet a minimum need, but we'd recommend increasing the amount that's put into planned maintenance activity and also the leak repair and leak management activity over and above what's there. And then in terms of those capital projects that we could deliver in addition to that baseline program, what we've put in here is there's 2 views here. There's in the first 3 years view, the additional increased funding, and these are all deliverable within Wellington Water's capacity to deliver. We've put those in a nominal order as to what we consider to be the priority. So the critical thing would be to address more of the risks at Moa Point and the Western wastewater treatment plants. And in that first one, you're addressing the roof at Moa Point and maybe bringing some of the other projects forward ever so slightly. Getting the initial detailed business case work completed for the universal residential smart meters, which is a critical intervention for water supply risks, and then increasing the amount of money that goes into pressure management activity. Then we've got a couple of, so the eastern trunk main, that's the one on the Miramar side of the airport. There's 20 million recommended to be brought into the first 2 years. That would address the replacement of the section closest to across the airport cargo area, which is currently being developed, and allow us to do the full design and consenting package in that period as a sort of risk mitigator for the further work. And then the airport interceptor, that allows us to do the design and consenting activity and also to address balance chambers along the pipe, which mean that if one of the triplicate pipes was to fail, we would be able to divert flow potentially to mitigate the risk of getting overflows and raw sewage flowing out. You've got the pump station renewals there. This program doesn't allow for a lot of pump station activity, almost none in it, apart from reactive work. But some of these, the very high criticality asset investigations identified a number of areas which are condition grade 4 and 5, which need investment in controls and electrical and mechanical systems. So bringing some money forward would support us to do that a bit more. Most of these are wastewater pump stations, more than drinking water pump stations, and these assets renew at a faster rate than pipes. So, an operating life for a wastewater pump might only be 15 years. So therefore, the renewal cycle is much higher frequency. Then you've got network renewals. That number would lift us up to 50% of the total of what we would recommend would be the ideal level of renewal to catch up with the backlog and the bow wave and deal with it over 30 years. And the last one we have on the list down there is the reservoir, and that would advance that program into the early part and allow it to progress. We've also noted there's a couple of specific things there. So there's the Let's Get Welly moving Golden Mile replacements. There's about $30 million worth of pipe assets that have been identified that should be subject to renewal through condition and failure records that would say if you were doing it, you would do those. And also there's the Houghton Bay stormwater pipe is also identified. Now we'd pull those from that total bucket of renewals funding. So just summarising, when we're looking at the sort of strategic outcomes that Wellington Water is tasked to deliver, we have looking after existing infrastructure, and this programme is heavily focused in that space. But there is more to do, and there is in fact more to do than can be delivered, but there is more that, if it was funded, could be delivered that would support that activity. And that's in the capital space, but also in the planned maintenance space. By increasing some operational spend in that area, we can increase the frequency of inspections of some of the assets, and therefore hopefully reduce the amount of reactive maintenance that's required. In the sustainable water supply and demand, the three critical interventions identified at that water summit were focusing on water loss and water leakage. So that's an OPEX intervention. And we're recommending that there would be more money targeted at that. And then the CapEx interventions in that one was for Greater Wellington, including water storage, which is in the latter years by the time you build that storage, and that's to respond to the consent risk. And the other one was in terms of water meters to enable demand management and identification of water loss. Then we've got growth, and we haven't got any new projects funded in this 10-year window that support the city's development strategies and plans. So there's just no capacity in this at the moment with the limited baseline funding. I forgot to. Improving environmental water quality. The funding is in here to meet the consent risks. These new consents are due to be enacted later in about middle of the year in 2024. They're currently out. The plan change with Greater Wellington is out for consultation at the moment. This level of investment fully supports getting to compliance by 2050, but until we see the consent itself and until the plan change is enacted, we don't know whether it's sufficient or insufficient. And then lastly, you've got climate change and resilience activities, and there's no new activity in there to address that at the moment. And that's a sprint. So open for questions.
Councillor Chung.
Great, thanks very much. I have three questions here. You mentioned the pump station maintenance a bit. So, you mentioned the pump station. So what you're saying is that you're not actually doing any maintenance on the pump stations at the moment? You're just waiting for them to, if they break down, you'll look at them?
Might ask Tim to answer that one.
So at the moment, we've got a reduced pump station inspection program. So instead of monthly visits, we visit wastewater pump stations quarterly to meet this year's budget. And if we go into baseline, we don't go at all. And option two, we continue with the quarterly visits, whilst we recommend monthly visits to wash and clean and do the work that's needed at a wastewater pump station.
Okay, so if there's no maintenance on them, if there's no going around and checking to make sure that they're operating efficiently and whatever maintenance you need to do, then wouldn't that exacerbate the chances of it breaking down?
Exactly. So, as I say, the standard program and our recommended program is monthly inspections and clean-outs. To fit this year's budget, we're doing that quarterly. And again, depending on what scenario we go for or council goes for next financial year, the option one, there is no funding to do any planned maintenance, and we just have to go when they blew up, essentially, and failed.
Yeah, okay. Second question, regarding the Bell Road and the Western reservoirs, you have 10.8 million for that. Is that for I think I noted something there about the inlet valves. So what are you actually changing? What are you actually doing on that? Is it a problem with the reservoirs themselves, or is it...
The Bell Road Reservoir is the oldest one of the network. It's about 112 years old, I believe. So the funding that's in there is the first 3 years, at 10.8, is the initial detailed design and construction, and at the beginning of construction within that. The actual cost to deliver is a bit more than that. I think it's in the list there. Does it say 90? I can't quite recall. So what that is to build a new reservoir above the existing Bell Road Reservoir. It's Moetira. And then once that is built, then you can then decommission the Bell Road Reservoir and take it out of service. So the 10.8 brings that activity forward into the earlier years.
Councillor, that's 3, so I'll come back to you.
Oh, that was actually 2.
No, it was actually 3. Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. Could you use some additional money and what that would be used for this current financial year? I mean, if we said, because I know you asked for an extra 10 million and I think we gave you about 7.5 from memory, or 7. So if we said we made a decision before the end of this calendar year that we could up our budget for you for the remaining 6 months, would you be able to do additional work, or is that not feasible?
Sorry, I'm assuming you're referring to OPEX. Yes, we can do additional work, and we would focus it on the acute water shortage risks, so water leakage.
Okay.
Right.
And do you have, how much would that look like from a capacity perspective? Do you know?
Him to respond.
So currently we've reduced subcontractor working in Wellington City. They all have been moved elsewhere. So when we can get it's about $2,500 per leak repair on average. So and there are resources available. We think we've got the capacity to do anywhere between about $2 and $2.5 million worth of leak repairs. At the moment that we could call upon. So we've got a couple of crews that we know we can draw into the area. And for Wellington City, yeah.
Okay,
Wellington City.
thank you. And my second question is the Golden Mile. You say that the council's provided funding for the design work. Is that just the design, not the actual work? I'm assuming.
I can answer that. So the design for the Golden Mile renewals has been paid for out of the Wellington Water budget for this year. So that's been ring-fenced.
Okay, so the design work. So how much is that approximately?
400,000, I think.
But you need 30K out of our budget, out of the water budget, to do the Golden Mile stuff. Is that right?
Well, it's shown as 30. It's actually 18, but we need to determine what level of contingency we put on that. So that's got a very high contingency figure associated with it.
Okay, so, but if we didn't do the Golden Mile work, we wouldn't need to, that's, from what I can interpret from here, is it's less important compared to some other renewals that need to be done.
Yeah, and that's that trade-off between it's a critical thoroughfare and it's being rebuilt, but of the renewals, they're not the most important renewals. So that's that trade-off we have to make.
Okay, thank you. And that's not counted in the 139 million budget for the Golden Mile at the moment, is it? Thank you.
Councillor Abdurrahman.
So you said the recommended one. Last year when you came, we asked about the capacity, human resources. Are you able to deliver if we give you the maximum amount, even more? At this stage, have you improved capacity-wise?
Yes, we are.
So, regards to the league currently not attended, about 2,500 of them, and if we go with option 2, it's going to be another 1,000 of them. Does that mean the extra amount to you, if you require, according to Councillor Calvert, if we give you that amount, that 2,500 leaks will be fixed in the next 6 months?
So we can fix around that sort of volume of leaks, bringing in resources on the assumption that the funding is coming from Wellington City and no other councils.
So that basically 2,500 leaks by 2,500 if per leak. Did you say 2,500 per leak?
On average.
On average. Okay.
Councillor Brown.
With this presentation that we've received today, has it gone to your board before it comes to us? I mean, are we the first people beyond the executive of Wellington Water to actually have seen this presentation, or does it get signed off by your board?
This type of presentation gets signed off internally by our technical committees, not by the board, no.
Deputy Mayor Foon.
Thank you. Can I just ask about the resource management and the contractors particularly? Is there an effort being made to bring as much work in-house, or is that something that is part of the strategy to reduce the costs, or is it all, contracted work? Is there a strategy for that, is what I would like to ask.
Can I just clarify whether you're talking about OPEX and the operations or the capital?
OPEX, yeah.
Do you want to talk?
Yeah, can do. So yes, there is certainly an effort to resource up. I'm not sure if any of you have heard the recent ads on the radio where Wellington Water's looking, those are service people, to fill our vacancies in our front line, to fix leaks and do other things. So there's a concentrated effort going on in that space. We've got about a 25% vacancy at our front line. So we're trying really hard to get those positions filled.
And one more question just on the Houghton Bay, just to clarify on the, in the brackets, you've got part of network renewals, not an addition, but it's listed as an additional cost. So just how does that fit into this picture?
What we're saying is, of the network renewals quantity, some of that would be used in if we prioritise Houghton Bay stormwater relining, then that would take from the capacity we have to deliver other network renewals.
And can I just understand just about the timeline proposed that is in the 1 to 3 years at this stage? If that is...
At this stage, that's not funded at all.
Right, so it does need to be extra?
Yes, it's in addition to the baseline programme.
Thank you.
I'm just interested, having been on council for, we've now with 4 years and we've significantly increased funding, whether that has led to kind of efficiencies or that you might be able to describe to me, because it seems like we've put in, significant amounts of funding and then be told even basic work cannot be done for the money that we've allocated.
The challenge you have is you've come off a very low base and your network's ageing. And when you don't keep up with your renewals at a very basic asset management level, your operational funding just increases because you have to spend more and more with the maintenance side of it. So we're doing what we can do in terms of trying to get those efficiencies with our front line. So we are doing that. We're looking internally and making sure that we are not going beyond anything that councils are having to do with their own budgets. But I think you are dealing with a legacy issue, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
Just a very brief one. With the Bell Road Reservoir, I thought that was being, once Omaroro was commissioned, that was no longer required.
So the advice that I have, and I am not an expert on the drinking water network, is that there is still a supply requirement to that part of the city. So, and it's particularly around the Arrow Valley area and around there. So, and that reservoir is still crucial for doing that. If that reservoir was to fail, then we can supply via pressure reducing valves off the main. But there's nothing in the there's no backup water supply. So in terms of there's increased firefighting risk in that kind of environment, and it's a short-term measure. So we still require it at this point in time, and there's a secondary reservoir which is a reconstituted Greater Wellington mixing tank that's used for partial supply as well. And this is part of a programme that was business cased, I think 3 or 4 years ago, that has not yet been funded. So it's catching up on that delivery of that activity.
It just seems a bit, it was pretty clear it was going to go, and now suddenly it's really important, but I'm not a water engineer.
Councillor Randall.
Thank you. I just wanted to try and cut to the chase on the money side and get a better understanding. I understand there's a lot of very good information here which outlines the different elements very well. It's just a little bit difficult to put it together in my head. So you're recommending in terms of OPEX, the option 3, which is an additional 24.6 million on top of 41.6 million as the baseline. That's your recommendation?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. So, And then in terms of the CapEx, you're recommending option 2, which is an additional CapEx spend of $22 million on top of the baseline that was in the LTP.
It's not our.
That's what I'm talking about for next year.
Yeah, for the next year, yes, it would be about that. I can't remember. I'd have to flick back to the right page. That's the OPEX? Sorry, we'd have to go back to there.
That's the one.
Yes.
Okay.
That's within our capacity to deliver. So that's back to that discussion about how fast could Wellington Water deliver an increased capital programme. And based on the previous 5 years, we have sustainably grown at 30% year on year, the amount we've delivered, and we don't see any reason why we couldn't continue to do that.
Thank you. That's what was my sort of follow-up question. Just skipping along to the next slide, I think it is, which is the graph. You are looking at annual CapEx spends of very large, significant amounts going forward. I'm not quite sure how to answer this. Ask this. Could you spell this out a little bit more in a more of a figures amount, because it looks to me like we're going to triple the amount of money we're going to spend every year on CapEx.
Yes, in practice. So, and we've talked to us about regionally, and you've seen some of the stories regionally. So, the unconstrained need that was submitted to the National Transition Unit back in March from the 6 Wellington Water Councils added up to about $1.1 billion per year. Now, we can't go from a current capital programme of $300 million and expect to hit $1.1 billion in 1 year. That's a bit ambitious. But what we're saying is that is the need, that we need to be able to do that to meet all of those renewals requirements in the system, meet those increasing regulatory standards in the system, supply growth to the region, and meet those water supply risks. That's what we need to be able to do. So we have looked back at what we've managed to do to grow our programme, and we have grown from $60 million to $300 million sustainably and continue to deliver. So we don't see any reason why we couldn't continue to grow sustainably, and that means that we can take both Wellington Water capacity to manage an increasing programme, the supplier and contractor panel, so that they can grow their resources and bring on staff and equipment, and also the consultancy panel. Now, one of the risks we've not talked about here is if we do end up constraining the capital programmes, there is a risk of some of those contractors actually leaving the region, and that they won't be available to us when we do want to scale up and meet some of those needs. And so some of those guys that you see working in the streets relaying pipes at the moment, those are the ones that are probably most at risk of this programme, because they're caught in a pincer movement between the needs that we have to fund at the treatment plants in terms of that baseline capital that has to go in, and some of those other activities which are not sort of pipe laying type activities that need to get funded. And so that's one of those sort of hidden risks within these programs, and it's not just Wellington City that's facing this challenge. It's all of the councils have this to some degree.
I'll put you back on the list. Councillor Free.
First of all, a quick one. I saw on Scoop or somewhere that so there was a claim made that the work on the Taranaki pump station stopped because of lack of funding. Can you please reassure me that's not true?
And as this programme fully funds all of those.
So we haven't got work that's actually stopped for lack of funding right now. I thought it might be just some.
I don't believe so, but yeah,
okay.
We'll double check.
Can we double check and get back to you?
I would have thought you'd have been able to tell me yes or no.
We don't think that's happening, but we want to double check just to make sure that there isn't something going on. We're not aware.
So I have a question about the water system, because in my area of Strathmore we've got a lot of water leaks, drinking water leaks. And you're saying that we could, if we put in, I guess a bit like Nuridan's question, if we put in an extra 2 to 2.5 million, we'd have 1,000 extra leaks fixed. Is that what the estimate was? What's the trade-off between that and actually putting a bit more money in and getting some of these systems renewed rather than just repaired?
Well, sorry, there's two different things going on. So in terms of the acute water shortage and the leak, so that leakage and the problem that we have, it is operational investments and the leak repairs that need to happen, and they need to happen every single year. You can't just fix it once and think that you fixed the leak, because another leak will pop up somewhere else. So it's sustained investment. As the network gets older, you're going to get more leaks. That's just inevitable. Renewals is a 30-year game to replace those assets. So it is important that you do both things. But in terms of the water supply risk, operational investment in leak repairs is the most important thing you can do. We won't be able to renew our way out of the trouble in a couple of years. That's a 30-year program.
Can we see a schedule of your renewal plan, like your 30-year renewal plan? Do you have one?
So the way that we prioritize our renewals, so at a baseline level, so you start with an age-based approach to say, nominally this pipe, this type of material should be good for 90 years. Then when we get down to it, we do condition assessment to target which pipes we do focus on. And the ones that actually go in the renewal program and are targeted in the next 6 years all have a failure history associated with them. So it's not just an age-based thing. They have both a condition assessment and they have a failure history that we're dealing with. So we're knocking over the worst performance.
So you have a 6-year program at the minute, is that right? And can we see what that 6-year program is right now?
I haven't got it with me, but I can provide it.
That would be useful. Yeah. I'd like to know if some of the problem streets are actually on the list. Thank you.
So is there anybody who hasn't asked a question? Who, if not, I'll go on to the second. Oh, someone
yes,
online?
Rebecca.
Yes,
Rebecca.
Councillor Pannett, sorry.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thanks, Wellington Water staff. I appreciate you've got a really difficult job. Sorry, did I hear correctly that there wasn't really much provision for dealing with climate change? And then the other question I had was, last long-term plan, we were going to look at providing for growth, which we know is coming. So I guess I was just a bit unclear about how we're going to manage from here on. Thank you.
So I can speak to what we've managed to put in the baseline program. So there isn't a lot of new activity that responds to climate change in here. So in terms of, not just climate change, there's resilience activities, both earthquake risk and sea level rise, and then carbon reduction activities. We haven't been able to provide any funding in that space. In terms of growth activities, the investment that you see in that pie chart is related to the existing level of service investment that's going into the Taranaki Street program of investments, but there isn't any new investment able to be provided at the moment that supports those growth strategies and those development strategies that have been put together in this current triennium. We haven't been able to provision that.
So is that a little bit scary? My last question.
I think from our point of view, we're running through and saying we're dealing with the existing network first. And as Julie said, there's 2,700 kilometres of pipe, over 100 pump stations, 70-odd reservoirs, 2 significant treatment plant assets. There's all of these assets that are existing that we need to make sure that we support first. But yes, we do want to do it. We don't want to be a block to the city in terms of provisioning that. But in terms of priority, getting over some of the backlog of those issues first is where we would recommend we focus first.
Thank you. So I'll now go back into... Oh, sorry, Julie, sorry.
Just got a clarification.
Just to confirm for Councillor Free, the project directors confirmed that nothing on Taranaki Street was paused. I think there was a bit of adjustment on some of the other city pipes.
Can I Sorry, I would just like to refer back to the question that Councillor Brown asked me about whether the board has seen the advice. Just want to clarify that the board has endorsed our approach to the advice, but not the actual details and specifics. And we have made our board aware of the implications and impacts of the different levels of funding that councils may choose.
All right, we'll go into the second round. Councillor Chung.
Right, thanks. I have 2 questions. First of all, you're talking about the water leakage as being all OPEX. So that means that the cost for those comes out of being reactive. So when you find a leak, that comes out of OPEX. So when you're looking at the renewals, that comes out of CAPEX, right? Okay, I just want to clarify that, thanks. And we had a submission a little while ago, a few weeks ago, from someone who said that he has two firms of drain layers who are available to actually help on any leaks in Wellington. So are we using more outside contractors for these, or do you just have one set of contractors that you actually use?
So just for clarity, Councillor, at the moment there's no external contractors operating in Wellington City Council for funding reasons.
Councillor Abdurrahman. Councillor Randall.
Yes, just so just looking at that graph up there in terms of the capex spend going forward, because it's asking for quite a lot of, there's a lot of investments needed, and you've told us that in multiple ways. Seeing it in number terms is a different, very straightforward way of looking at it. I was wondering that at the end of all of this, in 2033, 34, can you give me a little bit of a description of what would have expected to be achieved during that time, and what the nature of the Wellington water system will be if we commit to this this major investment?
I'll have a go. So we're starting to address the backlog of repairs and renewals. I would anticipate that we would have addressed all of the critical activities at the treatment plants within that frame and be in compliant state. We'll be down the road of meeting those new global consents and achieving that. Within this program, so on the baseline funding, we won't, we won't have addressed that water supply risk. In the big funding, then you've got, in our preferred program, you would have water meters, and you would have addressed the worst of the leaks, and we'd be back in a more stable situation with the water supply, a secure water supply environment for the city. I think that's probably the key things that you're getting here.
Is there anything, because you talked about a wave of backlog, I mean, how much would you have caught up on the backlog of the renewals, because you talk about this wave that's coming towards you of expiring pipes across the city?
So what the enhanced program there deals to about 50% of our recommended level of renewals. So it's not all of them. We won't have caught up on the backlog, but even then, when we gave the advice a month back, what we were saying at the time was it's a 30-year program of sustained uplift. So there's about, if we were to follow the track that we recommended, and we knew that was going to be a challenge, you lift up for about 5 years, and then you sustain a level of renewals of about 41 kilometres for the next 25 years. And that gets you back on track. So that doesn't get you all the way there, but it's a good start, is probably the answer. And we'll address the worst performing pipes in that period.
And under the baseline, we will still be where we are today, basically, or maybe further behind.
Probably going backwards, we would say.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Foon.
Thank you. Yeah, can I just, can we understand a little bit more about the sewer pipes to Moa Point? So just to understand, look, could we get a bit more of a slide detail, not today, but just when you can on that?
Yep, there is some more detail on the back of the pack, which may help. Yep.
Thank you. And okay, so just without reading that, but very quickly, this just on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, when you say that this is a risk, where would that sit? And
it's up there in the 8 or 9 area.
Okay.
It's as you can see on that picture, it's the concrete on the inside of the pipes corroding, exposing the steel, so the structure of the pipe is diminishing.
Okay, and then there's an interlink. Is there an interlink between the airport seawall and this pipe being upgraded? Are they a separate fix, or are they integrated?
I'm pretty sure they're separate. The wastewater pipes run through bio-based side of the airport, but they're on the airport land.
On the airport land, okay. Yeah,
the road and the seawall. I don't know anything about the seawall.
Yeah, I can see that there. Okay, and at the moment, are you requesting that is done in the first 1 to 3 year time frame?
I think we'd proposed that the the work on, as Pete mentioned, the work on the eastern side started first because there's only the one pipe.
Right.
On the Kilburnie side, there are 3 pipes, and so the work we were proposing was to refurbish what we call balance chambers, where there's a couple of spots, Tirangi Road and on the airport, and one other where you can put boards in to divert the pipes, the flow away from the. If one pipe failed, you can divert flow around it readily. So our initial proposal was to focus on that contingency work for the Kilburnie side on the first 3 years, and then proceed with rehabilitating or replacing those sections which are verified in poor condition on a risk approach. Yeah.
Councillor Calvert.
How many kilometres are we renewing each year at the moment? I mean, you might have covered up. I can't.
I have a note in the file here. It's about 9.5 kilometres last year.
Okay.
I don't have with me the target for this year.
Okay, that's fine. And I just want to go back to one of my original questions, which was if you had an extra it turned out $2.5 million for the rest of this calendar year, how many fixes did you say roughly? Or was it hard?
About 1,000.
About 1,000. Would extra capital expenditure as well help in the next 6 months at all in any way, or is it too late to instigate any new work?
My understanding is, well, there is the pressure control valves and there is some reactive work in terms of renewals, but my understanding is that the bulk of the capital programme will be completed by early in 2024. So, Christmas, January, February. So there is options to bring forward work that's already planned and available if there was additional capital funding.
It would be quite good to get an understanding of what that could be, so that we can think about should we. Yeah, and I really just want to understand from our own officers, have you seen this advice to date?
Do questions for the next section. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. Councillor Free.
Sorry. Actually, it's gone out of my head. Can you come back to me in 2 minutes?
Councillor Chung, we'll come back to you. You try and...
Great, thanks very much. On that last photo that you showed of the I think the eastern trunk main, the one with the reinforcing steel being exposed, is that a sewage or it is sewage? Okay.
Yeah, and sorry, the picture is actually of the triplicate interceptor, but the eastern trunk main also has a similar condition in the roof structure.
I see. Yeah. Okay. So all these lines here are the reinforcing, are they?
Yes.
Yep. Great. Thank you.
You're great.
Sorry. One of my questions was, you said the 2.5 million, 2 to 2.5 million could be used as long as other councils didn't apply as well. And my question would be, how are you going to balance it out if you get oversubscribed because everybody thinks, oh wow, we'll tip a bit extra in? And would we get a refund if we decide to tip extra in? I'm just anxious because my next question is actually going to be, and maybe you can address them together, is I don't feel I'm in a position at the moment to actually monitor what we've committed to with you guys and where the money's actually going. I know you give us some statistics, but for me, I guess I need a bit more granular detail to be very confident that I know where all these, tens, I know it's expensive, but there's literally hundreds of millions of dollars going in this direction, and I couldn't hand or heart say I know where it's being spent. Not all of it, some of it, yes.
So yeah, I can answer the first one. Currently, we've redirected leak repair resources to undertaking reactive connection renewals, and that's happening in Wellington City. So there's a couple of crews there, and we have a couple of more crews coming in. Hutt City has upped its funding, so we've shifted some resources into Hutt City Council to escalate leak repairs. But we do have subcontractor resources that are sitting that need extra work that we can bring to bear. But that would, as I say, it is sort of first mover advantage to be relatively crass as taking that approach. And we have, obviously we've got our recruitment drive going on, and if we can fill that 20-25% vacancy gap, it gives us more capacity and capability to do work in that space.
Is there a way we can get more of a handle on what you're actually using our money for? So, yeah, thank you.
I understand the need for councils to see where the money's going. We do provide monthly reports, financial reports and program reports to the council. And do we put them on our website? No, we just provide them to officers. So, and then we do a quarterly report to you, which I think comes to council. And I'm just going to check round with Mark Ford, who is our GM Business Services, for anything else.
Yeah, and that does both financial and non-financial performance.
To use the microphone, sorry, because there are people online.
He's saying that we do financial and non-financial reporting.
All right, I have a last question from Councillor Young. Quickly.
Yeah, is it actually possible, like for me, I want to know that you fixed 3 leaks in Karori Road, 5 leaks in Tiatia Road. I actually want to know what the money's been spent on. Not that we just fixed 1,000 leaks and we spent this much money. I want to know what's been done. Is that too hard?
So, no, look, we can certainly give the number of leaks fixed in Wellington City. That's not a problem, and I've got it in front of me here on a monthly, month-by-month basis. Down to the road would be a bit more difficult, and take a lot more. We could look at if we've got that data readily and easily extractable, then we can potentially get it out of a system and show that. Some of the stuff we can do spatially. We certainly can easily provide, and I think we've started to do an operational report that we've started to share with officers, and that's going to get down to being able to, our next iteration of that slices it into council areas, so should be able to see that as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Young.
So while I have you captive here talking about interceptors, can you tell us what's happening with the interceptor underneath the proposed site for the Chinese embassy?
I haven't had any update on that for a few months, so I'm not 100% sure.
Found out, I'd love to know. I mean, are they building over it, or?
Our focus was on protecting the structure of that pipe. Yeah.
I think that's come to the end of the question. Thank you very much.